Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramanaya. Prostrations to Bhagavan, who shines as the Self in all beings. We begin today's Satsang with a prayer by Srimati Sapna Ganesh, which will be followed by Muktaka trayams chanting by Sri Nandakumarji.
दक्षिणामूर्तिसारम्भां शङ्कराचार्यमध्यमां रमणाचार्यपर्यन्तां वन्दे गुरुपरम्परां वन्दे गुरुपरम्परां वन्दे गुरुपरम्परां शुक्लां वरदरं विष्णुं शशिवर्णं चतुर्भुजं प्रसन्नवदनं ध्यायेत् सर्वविघ्नोपशान्तये आङ्गिकं भुवनं यस्य वाचिकं सर्ववाङ्मयम् आहार्यं चन्द्रतारादि तं नमः सात्विकं शिवम् ॐ नमो भगवते श्रीरमणाय. नमो रमणा to everyone.
एकम् अक्षरम् हृदि निरन्तरम् भासते स्वयं लिख्यते कथम् हृदयकुहरमध्ये केवलं ब्रह्ममात्रम् यहमहमिति साक्षात् आत्मरूपेण भाति हृदि विषमनसा स्वं चिन्वता मज्जता वा पवनचलनरोधा आत्मनिष्ठो भवत्वम् देहं मृण्मयवत् जडात्मकम् अहं बुद्धिर्न तस्यास्त्यतो नाहं तत्तथ भावशुक्तिसमये सिद्धात्मसद्भावतः कोऽहं भावयुतः कुतो वरधिया दृष्टात्मनिष्टात्मना सोऽहं स्फूर्तितया अरुणाचलशिवः पूर्णो विभाति स्वयम् सोऽहं स्फूर्तितया अरुणाचलशिवः पूर्णो ಸ್ವಯಂ. ನಮೋ ರಮಣ.
Namo Ramana.
ನಮೋ.
We will now have chanting of Upadesa Saram by Uma Sripathy.
नमो रमण. कर्तुराज्ञया प्राप्यते फलं कर्म किं परं कर्म तज्जडं कृतिमहोदधौ पतनकारणं फलमशाश्वतं गतिनिरोधकम् ईश्वरार्पितं नेच्छया कृतं चित्तशोधकं मुक्तिसाधकं कायवाङ्मना कार्यमुत्तमं पूजनं जपश्चिन्तनं क्रमात् जगत ईषधीयुक्तसेवनम् अष्टमूर्तिभृद्देवपूजनम् उत्तमस्तवादुच्चमन्दत चित्तजं जप ध्यानमुत्तमम् आज्यधारया स्रोतसासमं सरलचिन्तनं विरलतः परं वेदभावनात् सोऽहमित्यसौ भावनाविदा पावनीमत भावशून्यसद्भावसुस्थिति भावनाबलात् भक्तिरुत्तमा हृत्स्थले मनः स्वस्थता क्रिया भक्तियोगबोधाश्च निश्चितम्. नमो रमण.
Namo Ramana. We will now have two songs from Ramananjali music. One will be presented by Savitri Krishnan and Sri Jaisriram Krishnan. The second one will be by Revathi Sankar.
सुधेय शरधिये गांभीर्यद सिरिये सुधेय शरधिये गांभीर्यद सिरिये परम आत्मवेजं बेळगिन गिरिये सुधेय शरधिये गांभीर्यद सिरिये परम आत्मवेजं बेळगिन गिरिये सुधेय शरधिये किरण चल्लियल्लवनु कविद देवने किरण चल्लियल्लवनु कविद देवने हृदय कमल दळव तेरेव हृदय कमल दळव तेरेव सत्य सूर्यने तेरेय मेले मेरे तु चित्र सरिव परियनी जनिसि मुळुगुतिगुದು विश्व निन्न मೈಯಲಿ ಸುಧೆಯ ಶರಧಿಯೇ गांभीर्यद सिरिये सुधेय शरधिये गांभीर्यद सिरिये परम आत्मवेजं बेळगिन गिरिये सुधेय शरधिये तन्न ಅಂತರಂಗವನೆ ತಾನಿರೀಕ್ಷಿಸಿ ತನ್ನ ಅಂತರಂಗವನೆ ತಾನಿರೀಕ್ಷಿಸಿ ನಾನೆನ್ನುವುದು ಹುಟ್ಟಿತೆಲ್ಲಿ ನಾನೆನ್ನುವುದು ಹುಟ್ಟಿತೆಲ್ಲಿ ಎಂದು ಶೋಧಿಸಿ ನೋಡಲಾದ ಆತ್ಮ ನಿನ್ನ ಸೇರುತ್ತಿರುವುದು ನದಿಯು ಕಡಲ ಕೂಡುತ್ತಿರುವುದು ಸೋದೆಯ ಶರದಿಯೇ ಗಾಂಭೀರ್ಯದ ಸಿರಿಯೇ ಸೋದೆಯ ಶರದಿಯೇ ಗಾಂಭೀರ್ಯದ ಸಿರಿಯೇ ಪರಮ ಆತ್ಮವೇ ಬೆಳಗಿನ ಗಿರಿಯೇ ಸೋದೆಯ ಶರದಿಯೇ ಹೃದಯವನೇ ನಿನ್ನ ದಿವ್ಯ ಪಾದದೀರಿಸಿ ಹೃದಯವನೇ ನಿನ್ನ ದಿವ್ಯ ಪಾದದೀರಿಸಿ ಎಲ್ಲ ರೂಪಗಳಲು ನೀನೇ ಎಲ್ಲ ರೂಪಗಳಲು ನೀನೇ ಇಹುದ ಗುರುತಿಸಿ ಆತ್ಮವೆಂದೆ ಎಲ್ಲವನೂ ತಿಳಿವ ಧೀರಗೆ ಜಯವು ಸಿದ್ಧ ನಿನ್ನೊಳಗೆ ಮುಳುಗಿರುವವಗೆ ಸೋದೆಯ ಶರದಿಯೇ ಗಾಂಭೀರ್ಯದ ಸಿರಿಯೇ ಸೋದೆಯ ಶರದಿಯೇ ಗಾಂಭೀರ್ಯದ ಸಿರಿಯೇ ಪರಮ ಆತ್ಮವೇ ಬೆಳಕಿನ ಗಿರಿಯೇ ಸೋದೆಯ ಶರದಿಯೇ. ಓಂ ನಮೋ ಭಗವತೆ ಶ್ರೀರಾಮ.
Namo Ramana. We are meditating on the 25th verse of Ramana Suprabhatam. Ramana Suprabhatam is written by Shantanandapuri Swami. तिष्ठन्ति वैदिकशिखामणयः प्रहृष्टाः त्वत्पूजनाय धृतमङ्गलवस्तुहस्ताः नार्यश्च गायनपराः पुरतः स्थितास्ते श्रीशोणशैलभगवंस्तव सुप्रभातम् तिष्ठन्ति वैदिकशिखामणयः प्रहृष्टाः त्वत्पूजनाय धृतमङ्गलवस्तुहस्ताः नार्यश्च गायनपराः पुरतः स्थितास्ते श्रीशोणशैलभगवंस्तव सुप्रभातम्. Good morning, O Bhagavan of Arunachala. The Vaidika priests, holding in their hands auspicious materials, are standing for your worship. Women, singing hymns of praise, stand before you. When Bhagavan was sitting, I remember a picture where there are Vedic priests with auspicious things in their hands and Bhagavan touching it with lot of devotion. It's a wonderful picture. During those days, ladies also used to sing Bhagavan's songs written by Muruganar Swami, Sadhvom Swami, Manavasi Tata in praise of Bhagavan Ramana. Here is also a song in praise of Ramana written by Sadhvom Swami. The Kannada translation is by R.N. J. Gopal, music by Vijay Bhaskar. ಆಡೋಣ ಬನ್ನಿ ಹಾಡೋಣ ಆಡೋಣ ಬನ್ನಿ ಹಾಡೋಣ ಒಂದಾಗಿ ಕೂಡಿ ಗುರುಪದ ಸ್ಮರಿಸೋಣ ಒಂದಾಗಿ ಕೂಡಿ ಗುರುಪದ ಸ್ಮರಿಸೋಣ ಅಮ್ಮನಮ್ಮ ನಮಗಪ್ಪನಮ್ಮ ಅಮ್ಮನಮ್ಮ ನಮಗಪ್ಪನಮ್ಮ ರಮಣಾಯ ನಮೋ ಎಂದು ಜಪಿಸೋಣ ಆಡೋಣ ಬನ್ನಿ ಹಾಡೋಣ ಒಂದಾಗಿ ಕೂಡಿ ಗುರುಪದ ಸ್ಮರಿಸೋಣ ಶಾಂತ ಸಮುದ್ರ ಶ್ರೀರಮಣ ಅವತಾರ ಚರಿತೆಯ ಹಾಡೋಣ. ಶಾಂತ ಸಮುದ್ರ ಶ್ರೀರಮಣ ಅವತಾರ ಚರಿತೆಯ ಹಾಡೋಣ. ಕಾಂತದಂತೆಮ್ಮ ಸೆಳೆವನಮ್ಮ ಕಲಿಗಾಲ ದೈವವೇ ಇವನಮ್ಮ. ಆಡೋಣ ಬನ್ನಿ ಹಾಡೋಣ, ರಮಣಾಯ ನಮೋ ಎಂದು ಜಪಿಸೋಣ. ಮಾನ್ಯ ಸುಂದರರ ತನಯನಮ್ಮ ಧನ್ಯ ವೆಂಕಟರಾಮನ ಸ್ತುತಿಸೋಣ. ಮಾನ್ಯ ಸುಂದರರ ತನಯನಮ್ಮ ಧನ್ಯ ವೆಂಕಟರಾಮನ ಸ್ತುತಿಸೋಣ. ಆದಿ ತಿರುಚುಳಿ ಮಣ್ಣಿನಲ್ಲಿ ಅழகಮ್ಮೈ ಗರ್ಭದಿಂ ವಂದನಮ್ಮ. ಆಡೋಣ ಬನ್ನಿ ಹಾಡೋಣ, ರಮಣಾಯ ನಮೋ ಎಂದು ಜಪಿಸೋಣ. ಬಾಲ್ಯದಿಂದಲೇ ಹೃದಯದಲ್ಲಿ ಗುರುದೇವನ ಚಿಂತನೆಯ ಆಳದಲ್ಲಿ. ಬಾಲ್ಯದಿಂದಲೇ ಹೃದಯದಲ್ಲಿ ಗುರುದೇವನ ಚಿಂತನೆಯ ಆಳದಲ್ಲಿ. ಶ್ರೀ ಅರುಣಾಚಲ ಹಿರಿಮೆಯದು ತನ್ನ ವೈಭವದೆ ಎಂದು ನಿಂತಿತಮ್ಮ. ಆಡೋಣ ಬನ್ನಿ ಹಾಡೋಣ, ರಮಣಾಯ ನಮೋ ಎಂದು ಜಪಿಸೋಣ. ಎಂದು ಹೃದಯದೇ ಇರುವ ನಮ್ಮ ನಾನಾರೆನಲು ಅವನೇ ಕಾಂಬನಮ್ಮ. ಎಂದು ಹೃದಯದೇ ಇರುವ ನಮ್ಮ ನಾನಾರೆನಲು ಅವನೇ ಕಾಂಬನಮ್ಮ. ಅಂದು ಇಂದು ಎಂದು ಆಳ್ವವನು ನಮಗೊಂದು ಸುಖವ ತರುವನಮ್ಮ. ಆಡೋಣ ಬನ್ನಿ ಹಾಡೋಣ, ಒಂದಾಗಿ ಕೂಡಿ ಗುರುಪದ ಸ್ಮರಿಸೋಣ. ಅಮ್ಮನಮ್ಮ ನಮಗಪ್ಪನಮ್ಮ, ರಮಣಾಯ ನಮೋ ಎಂದು ಜಪಿಸೋಣ. ರಮಣಾಯ ನಮೋ ಎಂದು ಜಪಿಸೋಣ, ರಮಣಾಯ ನಮೋ ಎಂದು ಜಪಿಸೋಣ. ನಮೋ ರಮಣ. We will now have the sharing, the reading of Forever is in the Now by Sri Nandakumarji.
Namo Ramana. In this, the book reading segment of our Satsang, we continue our readings from Forever is in the Now, the timeless message of Sri Ramana Maharshi, edited and compiled by our founder president, Sri A.R. Natarajanji. Last week, we had come over to the second segment of the book, which is entitled Remembering Ramana Maharshi, the first part being the teachings, purely the teachings part. The second part is about remembering Ramana Maharshi. This part is introduced to us by the compiler, our founder president. In one small paragraph, we had read that introduction from Sri A.R. Natarajanji, but one small paragraph gives us the clue as to why this particular attention to this segment. I read that paragraph before I go to the article for this week. The paragraph goes like this. Before Ramana's Mahanirvana and immediately thereafter, there was hardly any book of reminiscences about him. The devotees remembering about what exactly it was to be with Bhagavan, those books were not present even until Mahanirvana, says the author. The publications related only to his teachings. As a result, people were not aware of his humanness, his patience, his consideration, and above all, his unfailing sense of equality. Given the common misconceptions about jnana and a jnani's conduct, one had a lopsided picture of Ramana, which these recollections have helped to rectify. Swami Venkateshananda of the Divine Life Society said that he too was a victim of this false notion. He had read the talks over and over again, but something was missing for him till Nagamma's letters came along. It completed the picture. He could see what jnana meant in day-to-day life. Not dry intellectualism, not withdrawal, but the expression of love in all its fullness. So, we cannot thank enough those who have given us this rich harvest. Devraj Mudaliar, Subramaya, Nagamma, Chalam, N. Rajan, Ramanadasa Sadananda, and several others, says the author. So, we go on to the first article in that sense that the introduction was from the author. The first article is The Hallowed Presence of Maharishi. The Hallowed Presence of Maharishi by Alan Chadwick, Sadhu Arunachala. The introduction to the author is like this. He is the author of the book A Sadhu's Reminiscences, covering incidents during his long period of stay from November 1935 as an inmate of Sri Ramanashramam in close association with Ramana Maharshi. He was later known as Sadhu Arunachala, hence the reminiscences by him were entitled as Sadhu's Reminiscences. The Hallowed Presence of Maharishi, Alan Chadwick. It is hard to think of anything new to say about the Maharishi. So much has been written already. His life has been so uneventful and his philosophy so clear-cut that it almost appears simple. When I see him now surrounded by an ever-increasing crowd of devotees, my mind is involuntarily drawn back to my early days in the ashram, when the tiled hall was more than sufficient accommodation even on the most crowded days. So this article must have been written by him in the later half of the 40s. Things were much simpler then, and there were none of the restrictions which have of necessity grown with the increasing numbers. We could come and go as we liked, and it was often possible to find the master alone and talk with him intimately. We little realized how lucky we were. It all seemed so natural and just as it should be. But in spite of all the changes that have taken place in the recent years, he remains just the same. His body may appear older. The approach to him may seem more difficult, but it is merely a change in setting. The essential, the I, the realized soul shines through it all, apparent to all but the most blind with growing lustre. The essential I, the realized soul in Bhagavan, shines through it all, apparent to all but the most blind with growing lustre. I have often marveled how Bhagavan seemed to change. He takes on an entirely different form on different occasions. I do not know if others have experienced this too. But sometimes when I walk into the hall, I see my mother come back to life sitting in front of me. I'll read that again. But sometimes when I walk into the hall, I see my mother come back to life sitting in front of me. The same expression of welcome, the same loving interest in the look with which I am regarded as I take a seat. It was almost uncanny. Yet, why should I be surprised? Is he not universal? Does he not take on all forms if we were only pure enough in mind to see it? The self is one and can be only one. his own words. And so, when in his presence, we are for one brief moment able to pierce the veil and find the universal behind the embodiment before us, we can certainly see other forms than the one we are used to associating with Sri Ramana. Did not the same happen on the battlefield of Kurukshetra to Arjuna? He found all familiar forms in his beloved Guru, Lord Krishna. And why should this be in any way exceptional? The Master is all powerful. It is entirely up to us, each one individually. Has not Bhagavan's apparently gradual withdrawal from close contact with his disciples been the natural consequence of his philosophy? He has never ceased to tell us that we must realize the self ourselves, and that no guru, however wonderful he may be, can do it for us. A friend may give us a glass of water, but he cannot possibly drink it for us. This is much the same. Bhagavan can and does shed his grace on all who come to him, but he cannot make them receptive to it, to grace. As the self is one, there should logically be no need of grace or outside assistance. And Bhagavan says that this is actually the fact. Just be still, he tells us. But we are so tied up to our concept of ego, the individualized self, we have so identified ourselves with an unreal idea of separate existence that without some assistance, we find ourselves unable to do anything except go on identifying ourselves with this unreality. I'll read that sentence again. Be still, he tells us. But we are so tied up to our concept of the ego, the individualized self, we have so identified ourselves with an unreal idea of separate existence that without some assistance, we find ourselves unable to do anything except go on identifying ourselves with this unreality. And so we come to him. Here is one who knows his identity with the one self, and not only knows it, but lives in constant awareness of it. And as it is the faculty of human nature to grow more and more like the person with whom we are in constant contact, so by such constant contact with the Maharishi, we too, in time, will grow to a realization of our oneness with the only self. The truth is, of course, that we do not really want self-realization, however much we may persuade ourselves that we do. Because if we really want it, we have it already. There can be no doubt about that. But we want to have bliss and keep the ego at the same time, an impossible combination. If we would only be honest with ourselves, for if we still have any desire, there is something wanting. So it cannot be bliss, which must needs logically be a desireless state. And the ego itself is nothing but desire. The desire for separate existence. Again, the Major is giving us a clue, Sadhu is giving us a clue as to what is the root problem. And the ego itself is nothing but desire, the desire for separate existence. And yet we, in our foolishness, are trying to find bliss, which is desirelessness, which is desireless in a state which is nothing but desire. Keeping the root desire for separate existence, how can we aspire for the desireless state, asks the author of this article. But it is not chiefly for self-realization that the majority of people flock to Bhagavan. It is because in his presence they find peace. Problems miraculously solve themselves or cease to exist. The strength to go back to the world and tackle life is found. But the conception of anything higher is often felt to be beyond the capacity of the one who seeks his presence. It is left to time and the secret working of his grace, in which they have complete faith. And herein lies their wisdom, for by faith all things are possible. I'll read that beautiful paragraph on Bhakti again. But it is not chiefly for self-realization that the majority of the people flock to Bhagavan. It is because in his presence they find peace. Problems miraculously solve themselves or cease to exist. the strength to go back to the world and tackle life is found. But the conception of anything higher, like self-realization, is often felt to be beyond the capacity of the one who seeks his presence. It is left to time and the secret working of his grace, in which they have complete faith. And herein lies their wisdom, for by faith all things are possible. People having experienced this peace and spread the good news, the numbers that flock to the ashram grow steadily, for there is little peace to be found in the world in these troubled times. And especially will there be vast numbers at this festival of Jayanti, which we celebrate this year on December 18th. For on such occasions, Bhagavan is magnificent, seated on his couch like an emperor on his throne, his fan held stiffly before him like a scepter. He emanates tremendous power and grace. People having experienced this peace and spread the good news, the number that flocks to the ashram grows steadily, for there is little peace to be found in the world in these troubled times. And especially will there be vast numbers at this festival of Jayanti, which we celebrate this year on December 18th, for on such occasions, Bhagavan is magnificent, seated on his couch like an emperor on his throne, his fan held stiffly before him like a scepter, and he emanates tremendous power and grace. And just to be in his presence at such a time is a never to be forgotten experience. When I see Bhagavan seated there in his glory, I think of the lad of scarcely 17 running away from his home in Madura. What a contrast! And what an unexpected development, suspected and hoped for, least of all by him. Even Bhagavan wouldn't have aspired or expected these things, he says. He, like I imagine the majority of jnanis, has always been retiring, disliking any kind of publicity. How often as a youth he tried to hide, always to be dragged out into the open by some well-meaning devotee. The darker and more repulsive the retreat, the better it suited him. For there, surely he felt, people would leave him alone to enjoy undisturbed the surpassing bliss of the self. But it was not to be. And how lucky we are that things have turned out in this way, that he was not allowed to enjoy his solitude alone, says the writer. Bhagavan has many amusing stories to tell of the attention of his early admirers, of the good lady who forcibly gave him a bath, washing his unkempt, matted hair untouched for months, which became in some miraculous way immediately disentangled and clean. On another occasion, when Bhagavan refused to go with some devotee to his house for a meal, how the importunate man would take no refusal, but picked him up bodily and put him into a cart and drove off with him to his house. Such stories, when told by Bhagavan himself with his radiant smile overflowing with humor, are a great joy to the listeners, showing them how truly human he is for all his attainment, and thus are a beacon of hope for all. For what one can attain is surely possible for others. At Jayanti, it is this human side of Bhagavan that we especially tend to emphasize, for it is essentially a family affair. Then in Jayanti, the children flock to their father in thousands, pay their homage and offer their congratulations at the beginning of a new year of his blessed life. And we silently pray to him that his physical frame may remain with us for many more years. For like children, we feel the need for his bodily presence, for the bodily presence of our beloved father. And we rejoice to see the number of devotees grow and to realize that his word of hope is spreading its influence year by year. Until now, there is no quarter of the globe where his name is not known. I'll read that paragraph again. At Jayanti, it is this human side of Bhagavan that we especially tend to emphasize, for it is essentially a family affair. Then the children flock to their father in thousands to pay their homage and offer their congratulations at the beginning of a new year of his blessed life. And we silently pray to him that his physical frame may remain with us for many more years. For like children, we feel the need for his bodily presence, for the bodily presence of our beloved Father. And we rejoice to see the number of devotees grow and to realize that his word of hope is spreading its influence year by year. Until now, there is no quarter of the globe where his name is not known. The next article we can perhaps begin and then go for the next part in self-enquiry. The next article is a visit to Ramana Maharshi, 1938, by Elliot C. Clark. Elliot C. Clark is introduced as a painter, famous painter from US, a renowned American painter who visited Ramanashramam in 1938. We can see how he paints the picture, the word picture of what he sees, and also introduces the teachings very beautifully. I'll begin and leave it so that Dileep can take over the next one. Elliot C. Clark writes, A Visit to Ramana Maharshi, 1938. The Maharshi sits half reclining upon a raised divan. He wears only a loin cloth. I have no preconceived thought, but pass before his presence respectfully. He seems quite oblivious, and if he has noted the stranger, there seems to be no reaction or awareness. Seated on the floor, yogi fashion, are many worshippers in silent meditation, the men separately, a small group of women in the farther corner of the room. Although I am the only foreigner present, no one seems to have any visual or curious interest. I sit among others on the floor. No word is spoken. My attention is at first a purely objective one. I study the head of the Maharshi. He is a man past 60. His hair close cut and white, a short mustache and a beard. His complexion rather light. His features are not typically Hindu. The back of his head is unusually full and round. High forehead, the brows almost in the center of the head, the eyes high set, and ears long and pronounced. The body in a state of composure. A tall, dark-skinned pilgrim enters. He is nude to the waist. Standing serenely before the master, he prostrates fully on the ground, his arms outstretched, his hands together. There is no emotional demonstration. It is the formal mode of obeisance, graceful and beatific. Then a woman enters. She kneels, bows her head 3 times, and joins the group of her sisters. The Maharishi shows no sign of recognition. Seated before me is a handsome, yellow-robed sannyasin. His spine is perfectly erect. His limbs are crossed against the thigh. The soles of his feet are turned upward. One is conscious of absolute absorption. One disciple pulls a rope, rhythmically moving a great fan or pankha, which is suspended from the ceiling, and refreshes the master. The collective quietude creates a natural tranquility. Objective thought and self-consciousness gradually subside and one merges in the prevailing unity. I live with that paragraph again. The collective quietude creates a natural tranquility. Objective thought and self-consciousness gradually subside and one merges in the prevailing unity. Om Namo Bhagavate Shri Ramanaya.
We will now have the sharing and self-enquiry session by Sri Dileep Simha sir.
Namo Ramana. Dhyayet Sharada Chandra Sundaramukam Tambraravindekshana Bhaktabhishtabara Bhayapradakaram Kaupinamatrujvalam Svatmanandarasanubhu सर्वानवद्याङ्गकम् श्रीमन्तं श्रीरमणीश्वरं गुरुवरं योगासनाध्यासितं ध्यायेत् श्रीरमणीश्वरं ध्यायेत् श्रीरमणीश्वरम् ध्यायेत् श्रीरमणीश्वरम् हृदयकुहरमध्ये केवलं ब्रह्ममात्रं यहमहमिति साक्षादात्मरूपेण भाति हृदि विषमनसा स्वं चिन्वतामच्युतव पवनचलनरोधात् आत्मनिष्ठो भवत्वम्. We'll commence the Atma Vichara by listening to Bhagavan's Upadesham. I'll be reading from the book Guruvachka Kovai from the chapter Meditation on the Truth. The topic is Aids to Enquiry, verse 758. The best way of quelling the movements of the mind, that as the perceiver, the objects perceived and the act of perception runs far and wide, is that of employing the mind to see itself through itself. I repeat, the best way of quelling the movements of the mind, that as the perceiver, the object perceived and the act of perception runs far and wide, is that of employing the mind to see itself through itself. In this verse, Bhagavan is showing how even when we do the practice of the spiritual things, including self-enquiry, how we are always caught up in this idea of trying to perceive something at all times. We expect the self also to appear as an object and I as an individual to be there to perceive the self. This division, this very desire, as Nandakumarji very beautifully read out, this foremost desire to experience, to have a separate identity and to experience something as an object is the foremost reason why we don't abide and experience the self, the stillness. It's this desire which makes us move from that stillness and repeatedly get caught in one or the other thoughts and finds that it is never able to trace itself back to the self. So Bhagavan therefore gives Atma Vichara, wherein he says that this being the foremost thing, until we realize that this desire is causing all the movement within us, he asks us to relentlessly question every thought which causes us to move outside by inquiring to whom is this thought, who am I? And by repeatedly questioning to whom is this, we realize it is for me. And thereupon when we inquire who am I and trace it to the source, we see that the source is actually free of any such desire. And by repeatedly practicing, Bhagavan assures, when the mind gets quite acquainted with the source, it recognizes that the very desire to see the triputis, the dvandvas that we see, is the reason for not experiencing that self alone is. And therefore, it realizes that Summa is the best course for abidance in the self. Until such time, Bhagavan says that one should continuously inquire, no matter how many thoughts come within us, and no matter whatever is the nature of the thought, whether it is good, bad, or even spiritual, we should relentlessly inquire to whom is this thought, recognize that it is for me, and thereupon inquire, who am I? And take the outward gone mind back to its source with the grace of the Sadguru, with the inquiry, who am I? And by doing so, the mind will abide at its source. And with repeated practice, Bhagavan assures that the mind will gain enough strength to remain at the source. With the immense grace of Bhagavan, with which alone we have come to this most direct path, let us do Atma Vichara for the next 10 minutes. Namo Bhagavate Shri Ramananjali.
Namo Ramana. We will now have the sharing of Dakshinamurti Stotram by Sri Venkatesh Deshpande.
Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviram Sahaviram Karvavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Gurur Brahma, Gurur Vishnu, Gurur Devo Maheshwara, Gurur Sakshat Parabrahma, Tasmai Shri Gurave Dakshinamurti Sarambham Shankara Charya Madhyama Ramana Charya Paryanta Vande Guru Parampara Vande Guru Parampara Vande Guru Parampara. We are doing manana on Dakshinamurti Stotram. Let's understand, why are we doing manana on this? God in the form of the Guru, God in the form of the Guru, with form takes me to the formless. God in the form of the Guru, with form takes me to the formless. When I transcend form, I become fearless because I am deathless. By Bhagavan's immense grace, we continue to do manana on Dakshinamurti Stotram. We have done manana till verse number 6. Today we'll do verse number 7. I request Sapna to kindly chant the Dhyana Shloka and the 7th verse, please.
Yes, sir. मौनव्याख्या प्रकटितः परब्रह्मतत्त्वं युवानां वसिष्ठान्ते वसदृषिगणैः आवृतं ब्रह्मनिष्ठैः आचार्येन्द्रं करकलितचिन्मुद्रमानन्दमूर्तिं स्वात्मारामं मुदितवदनं दक्षिणामूर्तिमीडे बाल्यद्दीष्वपि जाग्रदादिषु तथा सर्वास्वस्थास्वपि व्यावृत्तास्वनुवर्तमानमहम् इत्यन्तःस्फुरतं सदा स्वात्मानं प्रकटीकरोति भजतां यो मुद्रया भद्रया तस्मै श्रीगुरुमूर्तये नमः श्रीदक्षिणामूर्तये तस्मै श्रीगुरुमूर्तये नमः इदं श्रीदक्षिणामूर्तये. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Sapna. So the Dhyana Shloka says, I salute Sri Dakshinamurti, the young Guru who teaches the knowledge of Brahman through silence, who is surrounded by disciples who are themselves rishis and scholars in the Vedas. I worship Sri Dakshinamurti, who is a teacher of teachers, whose hand is held in the sign of knowledge, Chinmudra, whose nature is fullness, who revels in himself and who is ever silent. Verse number 7, let's try to understand it at a he who through the auspicious sign of knowledge, Jnana Mudra, reveals to his devotees his own self, which persists in all stages of age, childhood, boyhood, youth, and old age, in all states, waking, dreaming, and deep sleep, and in all other conditions, and who constantly manifests himself inwardly as I, to him, the divine teacher, Sri Dakshinamurti, is the prostration. So just do a little recap of the verse number 6. When you are awake, you observe variety of activities in your mind. During dream, you experience different kinds of activities in your mind. Then in deep sleep, your mind is absolutely silent. When you are awake, do you have ignorance? In Vedantic term, this ignorance is non-recognition of the self as Satchidananda Atma. This is avidya. Most likely, this ignorance is present during your waking state if you are not enlightened. If you have ignorance during the waking state, which is the Jagrat Avastha, you will have ignorance during the dream state, which is the Swapna Avastha as well. When you do in deep sleep, the ignorance is still present. In the deep sleep, in the absence of thoughts, emotions, perceptions, what you experience is perfect ignorance. Knowledge is represented by light. Ignorance is represented by darkness. In deep sleep, you have the perfect experience of the darkness of ignorance. If you throw a thick blanket over your head, covering your eyes, you won't see anything. However, you are not blind. You are perfect darkness. Similarly, in deep sleep, ignorance is still present, but ignorance is not something with any characteristics and qualities. Consciousness still shines in deep sleep, but consciousness illumines that blanket of perfect ignorance. Therefore, your experience in deep sleep is experience of nothing. In waking state, you are Satchidananda Atman, plus the body, mind, senses, plus all these experiences in your mind, plus the ignorance. In deep sleep, you are Satchidananda Atman, without body, mind, senses, but with dream experiences in your mind, plus the ignorance. In dream state. In deep sleep, you are Satchidananda Atman, without body, mind, senses, without any experiences in your mind, plus ignorance. But consciousness remains throughout all these states. So in this verse, says in the previous verse, that was the 6th verse, Sri Shankara explained the presence of consciousness in deep sleep state and the recognition of consciousness upon waking from the deep sleep. There are 2 more states of mind, which is the waking state and dream state. There are many other states of life as well. In Sanskrit grammar, when U is followed by it becomes va. There are various states of experiences, waking state, etc. It includes dream and deep sleep as well. There are other types of experiences throughout life. Childhood, it includes youth, adult, and old age. In all of these different states of experiences, there is one thing which persists, which is unchanging. It is continually shining within as I. This I is not the ego. It is referring to the true self, consciousness. It refers to that consciousness being Chit Sat. The one who knows your mind, your experiences now, and the one you knew when you were 1 month old is same. However, there seems to be discontinuity in life. Your picture at the time of 1 month old and now are quite different. Not just the body, but your mind, emotions are all different. Yet you say that was you at the time of 1 month old. Body is not the same, mind is not the same, but you are the same person. What is it that persists between 1 month old and what and who you are today? The consciousness by which your 1 month old experience was known and the consciousness by which today's experience is known is exactly the same. I'll read the statement again. The consciousness, the I amness, by which your 1 month old experience was known and the consciousness by which today's experience is known is exactly the same. There is in prenatal state. It is still the same consciousness due to which you know the experience before and after their birth. Your memory would not recollect your experience, but experience is absolutely present, and because of consciousness, it is known. Therefore, Sri Shankara says, in all these states, childhood, etc., there is something shining within that is always present. Thus, know as I, true self-consciousness, that consciousness which is real you persists throughout all the states. The consciousness is always present through all these stages in life: prenatal, childhood, younghood, adulthood, in all the states of mind, waking, dreaming, deep sleep. How do we come to understand this? There are two meanings here for the revelation of this teaching. One meaning is one's own self is self-evident. You don't need anyone to tell you that you are a conscious being. You don't need to read in a book that you are aware of your experiences. Your consciousness is self-established. It is self-revealing. That you exist is self-evident. That you are conscious is self-evident. It is not arrived at logically. It is not the product of thinking. It is a fundamental truth of who you are. Therefore, your consciousness reveals itself. Secondly, someone reveals that you are Satchit Ananda, Atman, that is same as Satyam Jnanam Anantam Brahman. Your consciousness is identical, non-separate with the reality because of which everything exists. This is not self-evident. That has to be revealed. This is not self-evident. This has to be revealed. This truth is revealed to those who are devoted to the Guru, devoted to the Vedantic teachings, devoted to the life of spiritual growth. This teaching is revealed by the means of an auspicious symbol through Chinmudra. The one who reveals your own true nature, Tasmai Shri Guru Murtaye Nama Idam Shri Dakshinamurtaye. The one who reveals your own true nature as consciousness being and as non-separate from the absolute reality, unto that this salutation, who is in the form of my Guru as well as in the form of Shri Dakshinamurti. Om Namo Bhagavate Shri Ramanaya. Namo Ramana.
Namo Ramana. We will now have the sharing of Devikalotra Jnana Vichara Padalam by Dr.Kalarani Rengasamy.
ஓம் நமோ பகவதே ஸ்ரீ ரமணாய. அருணாச்சலமென அகமே நினைப்பவர் அகத்தை வேறறுப்பாய் அருணாச்சலம். Namo Ramana to all. With the abundance grace of Bhagavan, we are meditating on Devi Kalotra Jnana Vichara Padalam, very graciously given to us by Bhagavan in Tamil. And the last satsang we saw, in one's life, half of the time goes off in sleep, and when he is in Jagrata state, he keeps on thinking and desire and aspire for something or the other. In the process of satisfying the desire, he gets into trouble. At times, because of Ishvara Chittam, it happens and he is happy. But the happiness does not last long because he is not satisfied with what he wants to do. So, more karma he does to get better option, better things, again falls into sorrow. So Bhagavan says, give instruction to the mind very strongly not to go out and make it remain in the self. Sittam idai unarthi yettanatale egamal tannilayil vaithiduvai menmelum vai. Do this process of abundance again and again, because when everything is normal, one is happy because he is with Atma. When something goes against his wish, the mind comes out. In that state, Bhagavan says, put the mind again to its source. When this practice continues, the mind will get used to remain in the self. Sandadamam Salipparave Santoshamagave. Bhagavan says in Apparapattu the same thing. Don't get dejected whenever the mind goes out. Divert it to its source through enquiry. Do this happily. Don't think, oh God, how many times I have to put this silly mind inside. It's coming out. Once, I'll tell you an example. Once, squirrels, young ones, were in the nest near Bhagavan. When they were very small, they did not come out. But after some time, when they got energy, they started coming out. Bhagavan used to put them back into the nest, but they used to come out often. Bhagavan said, you are also like human mind, which goes out and sees the world with wonder, and with the result gets trapped into sorrow. So keep on instructing the mind that there is nothing outside which is going to give you happiness forever. Happiness is inside. Get abide there. Sadhuvam says, இன்பமான ஒரு பொருள் இருக்குதுந்த நெஞ்சிலே அன்பு கொண்டு தேடினால் அளவிலாத சுகமள். There is the most beautiful Ananda Vastu inside you. Search that with love. If done, you will experience endless happiness. In the next stanza, Bhagavan says, சித்தம் எப்போது திறமாகும் அத்தை எவ்விதத்தும் சலிப்பித்தல் ஆகாதே. The most frequent two words that we use in the world is I am very busy, I am with tension. Who uses these words? If we see, kindergarten tiny tot says, Mom, I have tension. Then what to do with adults? Reason, the mind always is very active, thinking many things. Oh, I have to finish this work very fast because I have so many other works to do. He has a timetable for the week's work. He asks his wife to remind about that work to be done. Over and above, he sets reminder in the mobile phone. Does the work goes on planned by him? It is a great question because he changes his mind often. So there comes the confusion. Like this, the mind is very busy. It never takes a rest except in the deep sleep. In deep sleep, what happens? He leaves behind everything. His wife, children, wealth, pride, fame, everything. Yet, he is very happy in the deep sleep. When he is awake, he thinks he will be happy only with all these supports. He wants someone to praise him. The only time he will be happy is when he has more material. Then only he'll be happy. Only when he gets good wife, good children, he will be happy. Only with good neighbors, sometimes he will be happy. But where all these things go off during the deep sleep. Without them, he is so happy in the deep sleep. He never thinks, oh, I am sleeping, and when I am sleeping, all these which I have earned goes off, so I won't sleep at all. He never says like this. He wants to sleep and enjoy that ananda. Likewise, in the awakening state, Bhagavan says, if same short moment, the mind remains calm. In the awakening state also, for a short moment, mind remains calm without any oscillation. Catch hold of that state and don't allow the mind to rise from that state. Bhagavan says in this song, Sittam eppodu thiramagum attai evvidattum salipittalagade. See that the mind does rise up again and ponder over the worldly objects. Such a busy, ever oscillating, wandering mind, when come to a stillness, at any one point of time, it will look strange. Oh, this is not the nature of my mind. Why it should not, it is not thinking about anything, and it is very calm. I feel it is very strange. Why it is not reaching for someone action? Bhagavan says, one need not doubt about the mind's stillness. Instead, be in that state only. Ittanayum siddhikka vendadu indru. He says, don't think about the inactiveness of the mind. But he says, Ange achittathai bandithu nichalame pannu. Without doubting about any stillness, make it abide in its source. Allow the mind to be in that state, because place where that is the place where mind abide with its stillness, that is the Purna Ananda Swarupa. With experiencing Ananda, the mind will not be calm. Without experiencing Ananda, the mind will not be calm. Only when the mind experiences stillness, it will experience Ananda. It is actually vice versa. Bhagavan says, somehow or the other, it is the prime duty of a person to make this mind abide in the Swarupa. But is it that much easy to do? No. It is very difficult, no wonder. The only way to succeed over the mind and make it still is to just ignore the mind. Ignore whatever the mind says. Ignore whatever the mind thinks. Actually, there is no space for the mind in our body. So it is called, it is a devil. Bhagavan says, Pe agandai. He pictures it as Pe agandai. So, when it is ignored and give attention to its source, that is Atma. The mind, without getting any attention in course of time, what happens? It fades out. It finally gets destroyed and it will emerge, abide in the self. And there, as it is the nature of the self is Ananda, that also becomes Ananda only. Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramanaya.
Namo Ramana. We will now have the sharing of Sri Ramana Ashtottaram by Dr. Sarada.
Namo Ramana, prostrations to Ramana, shining as a self in all beings. By the immense grace of the self, shining and manifest as Ramana, we are meditating on the 108 names of Bhagavan Ramana, the Ramana Ashtottara Shatanamavali, composed by Vishwanatha Swami, which is a concise biography of Bhagavan as well. when Bhagavan was asked about any good biography on him, he said one could refer to the Ramana Ashtottaram. So we have this Ashtottaram, and having seen the namas pertaining to Bhagavan's birthplace, the greatness of his father, Sundaramayyar, and then he's shifting to that glorious Madurai, the Dwadashanta Mahasthala, and his enlightenment. Mahashakti Nipatena Prabuddhaya Namaha Paramartha Vide Namaha. He became enlightened. He became a knower of the ultimate, the Paramartha, the highest good. And then we meditated on the Nama Tivraya Namaha, one who is absolutely intense. He was intense in his knowledge, intense in his absorption in that knowledge of the self. Tivraya Namaha Pitrapadan Veshine Namaha. Having become intense in that, we saw that he was constantly absorbed in that bliss of the self. It was drawing him all the time to itself, and more intensely at times, more strongly at times, which made him unable to attend to anything other than that whatsoever. So when he was thus absorbed, Bhagavan says, he recounts that he was very often teased by his brother, elder brother Nagaswami, say calling him Yogi or Jnani or Yogeshwarar. And despite all this, Bhagavan continued in Madurai. He tried to maintain, or not consciously, he continued to maintain a semblance of his earlier activities and earlier routine. A semblance of his earlier persona was continuing for about 6 weeks, he says. The 17th of July 1896 was Bhagavan's enlightenment, and until the 29th of August 1896, Bhagavan continued to live in Madurai in his younger paternal uncle's house, and staying there, he continued to go to school and come, although he says that his interest in studies had come down to absolutely zero or minus. There was no minus, but it had come to zero, and he was not paying attention to any of the lessons, because of which he got a punishment. He was given a punishment to do an imposition in Bain's English grammar, to write an imposition 3 times. And having written it twice over, he felt the futility of it, absolute futility of it, and he got absorbed in meditation. And again, Nagaswami, his elder brother, mocked him and said, "Of what use is all this for such a one? What use is this home and hearth and all the comforts, whatever the basic minimum comforts being provided at home, even they should not be necessary if one is going to be absorbed in the self all the time." This is what Nagaswami, the elder brother, mocked at him. What was his intention? His intention was, by hearing this jeer, his younger brother would feel, no, it is not fair on my part to continue in this way, since I am enjoying this shelter, since I am enjoying the food being given by my paternal uncle, it is a duty cast upon me to study and do well. Nagaswami must have thought that his mocking at him would have the result of his thinking in this manner, but it had the opposite, right opposite effect. And in that in that sarcastic remark of his brother, Bhagavan heard the call of Arunachala. He heard the call of Arunachala. He said, he felt it is Arunachala saying, "Why are you here? Why do you need all this? Of what use is all this to you who are completely absorbed in me? To you for whom nothing else matters." So it is actually when we meditate upon the statement made by Nagaswami of what use is all this to such a one, we realize that Bhagavan had no use for anything other than the self. He absolutely had no need and no use for anything other than the self. So he could completely give himself to Arunachala, to Arunachala's call, completely. But the reverse is also applicable. That is, why are we unable to give ourselves completely to the Lord? Why are we unable to give ourselves completely to the self? It is because we find some use for all these things. We think it is important to have a good place to stay, good clothes to wear, food to eat. We believe it is important to sustain the body. We believe the body is important, and we believe our thoughts are important to sustain the body, to get things that we need for ourselves. We have use for other things, things other than the self. And so long as we have some use for things other than the self, we cannot be truly in search of the self or the Father. But Bhagavan actually found the truth of his brother's statement that he has no use for anything other than the self. He recognized that he had no use for anything whatsoever other than the self. Although that recognition was not spelt out, it was not phrased in his mind, nor did he analyze it. He later says that he was just drawn by a current, as it were. His schoolmate and close friend Rangan, later at Skandashram, asks him, "Bhagavan, you left home without telling anyone about it. But you could have told me. I was a very dear friend. You used to share many things with me, almost everything we used to share with each other. Why didn't you tell me that you're leaving home, that you're going to Arunachala?" And Bhagavan told him, "Rangan, did I pack my bags and go like a regular traveler? Did I pack my bags?" There was no bag that he took with him. There was nothing that he took with him. He did not even plan to take a single penny with him. He did not even wonder about how he is going to reach Arunachala. Pitrapadan Veshini Namaha. He just set out in search of his father. But Father Arunachala had to take care of how he would reach him. So says Ranga, I was just drawn there. I was pulled here by a current, or rather I was swept here by a flood, by an inundation. I was swept to Arunachala and brought here. I had no volition, no possibility of decision making, says Bhagavan. So we say that he felt the call of Arunachala, but actually we can also say that Arunachala just finished capturing him, took its full hold on him, and made him set out in search of itself. And Bhagavan says in his letter when he is leaving home. He says, I have, and actually he writes, I have in obedience to his command. So there is a command. And then he puts a mark to indicate an insertion. It says, I have in search of my Father and in obedience to his command set out. I have set out in search of my Father. That's why Vishwanatha Swami says, Pitru Padanveshine, Anveshine. He searched for the Father. He set out in search of the Father. Because he doesn't really know where Tiruvannamalai is. He doesn't really know how to get there. He has not been there. In fact, this young boy has never been out of his house alone. Out of his house, yes, he would have gone to school, he might have gone to play with his friends, but never to a new destination, never to a place. He has never journeyed on his own volition to any place. But here now he is going in search of his Father. So it was a command which Bhagavan felt. The call of his Father was what Bhagavan felt. And so he told Nagaswami, I'm going for a special class. And it is said probably that's the only lie which Bhagavan spoke in his entire life. And some others say that Bhagavan said it was a class, special class on electricity. And electricity is that energy, it's an energy, it's a very powerful energy. So there is the magnetism, the powerful energy of Arunachala which is drawing him. So he is going to the special class of Arunachala. Anyhow, he did tell his brother that he was going for a special class. And immediately his brother said, my college, please take my college fees from our aunt and pay the fees on the way. And this became Arunachala's first indication of his protection and his guidance in this search by Bhagavan. Pitrapadan Veshine. When one sets out in search of the Father, when one sets out within ourselves in search of the Father, the Arunachala Shiva, who is Aham, Arunachalame Aham. So when one sets out in search of the truth, of our true source, that way our Father within, then he provides us with the wherewithal to reach there. He provides us with the strength. Bhagavan provides us with the strength to reach him within ourselves. He provides us with the strength. He provides us with the knowledge as well, which happens in the journey. Whatever is needed, basic for the journey, is provided for. And so it was told to Bhagavan to take the college fees. And Bhagavan also recognized, this is Arunachala giving me the money for the journey. And Bhagavan set out of his house. Before going, his aunt asked him to eat something and go. So he ate something and he set out, and it was nearly noon time, and the train was scheduled to leave from Madurai at noon, and Bhagavan may have practically run all the way. The implications of what will happen if he does not board the train were also not on the mind of this young boy. He had left a note behind saying, this has in search of the Father, in search of my Father, and I have in search of my Father, and in obedience to his command, set out on this journey. This has embarked only on an auspicious venture. Therefore, None need grieve over this, nor spend money in trying to trace this out. So Bhagavan starts with I and then goes on to this body. Is set out on an auspicious journey. Don't worry, he is informing everyone, don't worry. I am going in search of my father. This is an auspicious journey, so don't worry, don't try to change the course of events. And he set out in search of Arunachala, in search of the father Arunachala, known to him, informed to him as being none other than Tiruvannamalai. So the money was taken, and when Bhagavan took the money, which was 5 rupees, was his brother's college fees, he quickly looked up an old address that was available at home and found that, according to the old address, which used to probably give railway guidelines as well, Tindivanam appeared to be the closest station, railway station to Tiruvannamalai. And Bhagavan saw that he could take a ticket to Tindivanam. He estimated that it would be around 3 rupees, so he took 3 rupees with himself and left the remaining 2 rupees change with his aunt, or rather in that box with the letter saying, putting in the footnote that your college fees has not been paid and 2 rupees are enclosed herewith. And he had not signed. He had left it as a dash because there was no longer anyone to sign. Only grace was there. Only grace enveloped everything. Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramanaya.
Namo Ramana. We will now have the chanting of Aksharamanamalai by Vallabh Srinivasan.
Namo Ramana. Arunachala Shiva, Arunachala Shiva, Arunachala Shiva, Arunachala, Arunachala Shiva, Arunachala Shiva, Arunachala Shiva, Arunachala. நைந்தழி கனியா நலநிலை பதத்தில் நாடி உட்கொள்ளலம் அருணாச்சலம் நொந்திடாதுந்தனை தொந்தனை கொண்டிலை அந்த கனி என கருணாச்சலாம் நோக்கிய கருதிமை தாக்கிய பக்குவமாக்கினி ஆண்டருள் அருணாச்சலாம் பற்றிமால் விடந்தலையொற்றிரமுனமருள் பற்றிடருள் புரியருணாச்சலாம் பார்த்தருண் மாலர பார்த்திலையெனினருள் பாருனக்கா சொல்வருணாச்சலம் பித்து விட்டுனை நேர்பித்தனாக்கினை அருள் பித்தம் தெளி மருந்தருணாச்சலம் வீதியில் உன்னை சார் வீதியில் என்னை சேர் வீதி உந்தனக்கே அருணாச்சலம் புல்லறிவே துரை நல்லறிவே துரை புல்லிடவே அருள் அருணாச்சலம் பூமணமா பெயர் நினைத்திடவே பிடித்திழுத்தனை உன் பெருமையறிவாரணாச்சலம் பேத்தனம் விட விடா பெய்யா பிடித்தென்னை பேயனாக்கின என் அருணாச்சலம் பைங்கொடியா நான் பற்றின்றி வாடாமல் பற்று கொடாய் காருணாச்சலம் அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலம் अरुणाचल शिव अरुणाचल शिव अरुणाचल शिव अरुणाचल अरुणाचल शिव अरुणाचल शिव अरुणाचल शिव अरुणाचल अरुणाचल शिव अरुणाचल शिव अरुणाचल शिव अरुणाचल अरुणाचल शिव अरुणाचल अरुणाचल शिव अरुणाचल अरुणाचलं வாழி அன்பர்களும் வாழி அக்ஷரமணமாலை வாழி. நமோ ரமண.
Namo Ramana. We will conclude today's satsang with the Ashtottara Puja. The Ashtottara Puja will be done by Sri Dileep Simha at his altar. The chanting of Ashtottaram will be by Vaibhavji and Prarthana and Uma and Ashwini.
नमो रमण. भारद्वाज विश्वनाथ विरचितं श्रीरमणाष्टोत्तर शतनामावलिः अपार सच्चित् सुखवारिराशे यस्योर्विमात्रं भुवनं समस्तं गुहाहितं तं रमणं गभीरं चिन्ताविहीनं हृदि चिन्तयामि. ॐ महासेन महंसेन जाताय नमः. ॐ श्रीरमणाय नमः. ॐ गुरवे नमः. ॐ अखण्ड संविदाकाराय नमः. ॐ महौजसे नमः. ॐ कारणोद्भवाय नमः. ॐ जगद्धितावताराय नमः. ॐ श्रीभूमिनाथस्थलोस्थिताय नमः. ॐ पराशरकुलोत्तंसाय नमः. ॐ सुन्दरार्यतपःफलाय नमः. ॐ कमनीयसुचारित्राय नमः. ॐ सहायाम्बा सहायवते नमः. ॐ शोणाचलमहोलीनमानसाय नमः. ॐ स्वर्णहस्तकाय नमः. ॐ श्रीमद्द्वादशान्तमहास्थले लब्धविद्योदयाय नमः. ॐ महाशक्तिनिपातेन प्रबुद्धाय नमः. ॐ परमार्थविदे नमः. ॐ तीव्राय नमः. ॐ पितृपदान्वेषिणे नमः. ॐ इन्दुमौलिना पितृमते नमः. ॐ पितुरादेशतः शोणशैलं प्राप्ताय नमः. ॐ तपोमयाय नमः. ॐ उदासीनाय नमः. ॐ महायोगिने नमः. ॐ महोत्साहाय नमः. ॐ कुशाग्रधिये नमः. ॐ शान्तसङ्कल्पसम्ब्रह्माय नमः. ॐ सुसन्दशे नमः. ॐ सवित्रे नमः. ॐ स्थिराय नमः. ॐ तपक्षपितसर्वाङ्गाय नमः. ॐ पुल्लाम्बुजविलोचनाय नमः. ॐ चन्द्रिकासितः शश्रीमण्डिताननमण्डलाय नमः. ॐ चूतवाट्यां समासीनाय नमः. ॐ चूडिताखिलविभ्रमाय नमः. ॐ वेदवेदान्ततत्त्वज्ञाय नमः. ॐ चिन्मुद्रिणे नमः. ॐ त्रिगुणाधिगाय नमः. ॐ विरूपाक्षगुहावासाय नमः. ॐ विराजगचलाकृतये नमः. ॐ उद्दीप्तनयनाय नमः. ॐ पूर्णाय नमः. ॐ रचिताचलताण्डवाय नमः. ॐ गम्भीराय नमः. ॐ परमाचार्याय नमः. ॐ सुप्रसन्नाय नमः. ॐ अभयप्रदाय नमः. ॐ दक्षिणास्य निभाय नमः. ॐ धीराय नमः. ॐ दक्षिणाभिमुखाय नमः. ॐ स्वराजे नमः. ॐ महर्षये नमः ॐ भगवते नमः ॐ ईड्याय नमः
ॐ भूमविद्याविशारदाय नमः ॐ विमलाय नमः ॐ दीर्घदर्शिने नमः ॐ आप्ताय नमः ॐ ऋजुमार्गप्रदर्शकाय नमः ॐ समदृशे नमः ॐ सत्यदृशे नमः ॐ सत्याय नमः ॐ प्रशान्ताय नमः ॐ अमितविक्रमाय नमः ॐ सुकुमाराय नमः ॐ सदानन्दाय नमः ॐ मृदुभाषिणे नमः ॐ दयार्णवाय नमः ॐ श्री शोणाचलहृद्भूतस्कन्दाश्रमनिकेतनाय नमः ॐ सद्दर्शनोपदेष्ट्रे नमः ॐ सद्भक्तवृन्दपरिवृताय नमः ॐ गणेशमुनिभृङ्गेन सेविताङ्गः सरोरुहाय नमः ॐ गीतोपदेशसारादिग्रन्थसञ्छिन्न संशयाय नमः ॐ वर्णाश्रममतातीताय नमः ॐ रसज्ञाय नमः ॐ सौम्याय नमः ॐ आत्मवते नमः ॐ सर्वामनिमतस्थानाम् आराध्याय नमः ॐ सर्वसद्गुणिने नमः ॐ आत्मारामाय नमः ॐ महाभागाय नमः ॐ मातृमुक्तिविधायकाय नमः ॐ विनताय नमः ॐ विनुताय नमः ॐ विप्राय नमः ॐ मुनीन्द्राय नमः ॐ पावकोज्ज्वलाय नमः ॐ दर्शनादगसंहारिणे नमः ॐ मौनेन स्वात्मबोधकाय नमः ॐ हृच्छान्तिकरसान्निध्याय नमः ॐ स्मरणात् बन्धमोचकाय नमः ॐ अन्तस्तिमिरचण्डांशवे नमः ॐ संसारार्णवतारकाय नमः ॐ शोणाद्रीशस्तुतिद्रष्टे नमः ॐ हार्दविद्याप्रकाशकाय नमः ॐ अविच्युतनिजप्रज्ञाय नमः ॐ नैसर्गिकमहातपसे नमः ॐ कमण्डलुधराय नमः ॐ शुभ्रकौपीनवसनाय नमः ॐ गुहाय नमः ॐ दण्डपाणये नमः ॐ कृपापूर्णाय नमः ॐ भवरोगविषग्वराय नमः ॐ स्कन्दाय नमः ॐ देवतमाय नमः ॐ अमर्त्याय नमः ॐ सेनान्ये नमः ॐ पुरुषोत्तमाय नमः
ॐ श्रीरमणभगवते नमः श्रीरमणाष्टोत्तरशतनामपूजां समर्पयामि यस्थाणोररुणाचलस्य पदयोः स्मृत्या जनिं प्राप्य तद् दिव्यानुग्रहसुप्रवाहविवशस्तादात्म्यभावं गतः निष्ठस्वगभीरनित्यतपसा लोकान् पुनास्येकराट् तस्मै श्रीरमणाय ते नम इदं लोकोत्तरज्योतिषे। सदाशिवप्रभावरण नमो महर्षि नमो महर्षि दर्शन सुख मंगल मुख सकल जीवहित सम्मुख ब्रह्म संघिये सदा तुष्ट सदा हृष्ट सदा शिवानंद पुष्ट परम महर्षि ब्रह्मनिष्ठ समदर्शी नमो नमो रमण सदाशिव प्रभावरण नमो महर्षि नमो महर्षि ನಮ್ಮ ಮನವದೊಂದು ಕಾಡು ನೀನರಿತಿಹೆ ಅದರ ಜಾಡು ಹಿತವನರಿತು ನೀಡುತ್ತೆಮ್ಮ ಕೊರೆಯ ತಣಿಸಲೈ ಬೇಡಲೆಂದು ಬಂದ ನಾವು ನೋಡಿಯೇ ತಣಿವೆವಯ್ಯ ಮೋಡಿಗಾರನೇ ಹಿತವ ನುಡಿದು ಪೊರೆ ನಮ್ಮನು ಬ್ರಹ್ಮ ಸಂಘಿಯೇ ನಮೋ 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 ರಮಣ ಸದಾಶಿವ ಪ್ರಭಾವರಣ ನಮೋ महर्षि नमो महर्षि नमो 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 रमण सदाशिव प्रभावरण नमो महर्षि नमो महर्षि बोलो भगवान श्री रमण महर्षि की जय।
Jai